I never expected to spend my 68th birthday standing on the streets of Chicago, my suitcase in hand, my heart heavy with disbelief. The city lights reflected off the wet pavement as I walked aimlessly, the echoes of my son's cruel words ringing in my ears. "You're just a useless old woman, Mom. What would you even do with a real inheritance?" David had known that. My hand trembled as I clutched the small, rusty key that our family attorney had handed me that morning. It all began at Thompson and Kline, the law firm that had handled David and Ethan's affairs for decades. Ethan, my son, had appeared in his perfectly tailored navy suit, hair immaculately combed, posture rigid with self-importance. I wore the black dress I had chosen for David's funeral 3 weeks earlier. The air in the office was thick with tension. "Before we begin," said Mr. Thompson, adjusting his glasses nervously, "I want to assure you that everything in this will is legally binding and exactly as Mr. Reynolds instructed." I should have recognized the warning in his voice, but grief and shock clouded my mind. The reading itself passed in a blur, punctuated only by moments that sliced through me like knives. "To my son, Ethan Reynolds, I leave the penthouse residence in downtown Chicago, along with my primary investment portfolio." And then, almost as an afterthought, "To my beloved wife, Margaret Reynolds, I leave the property located at 1420 Industrial Parkway, the garage and its contents." A garage. After 42 years of marriage, David had left me a garage. I stared at Ethan, expecting grief, sorrow, perhaps even concern. Instead, his face had shifted from solemnity to barely contained triumph. "Don't worry, Mom," he whispered, leaning close and placing a hand on my shoulder that was just a touch too firm. "I'll make sure you're taken care of." Taken care of? He meant by casting me out. I barely had the strength to ask the questions tearing through my mind. Why would David do this? Where am I supposed to live? What am I supposed to do? The answers came later that day. Ethan drove me back to the penthouse, the home David and I had shared for the past 15 years. The door had barely closed behind us before he began. "I think it would be best if you found somewhere else to stay, Mom." "What do you mean?" I asked, voice trembling. "This penthouse is mine now. It's in the will." Ethan's tone was calm, businesslike, rehearsed. "I'm having some colleagues over tomorrow to discuss converting Dad's study into a home office, and I need to start making changes." "And where am I supposed to go?" I whispered, disbelief and hurt warring in my chest. He shrugged, a movement so casual it stung with cruelty. "You could stay with Aunt Helen for a while. Or there's always that garage Dad left you." His laugh, sharp and mocking, cut through me. "Why he left you that dump is beyond me. What are you going to do with it? Open a mechanic shop at your age?" Something inside me broke. This wasn't my home anymore. It belonged to Ethan now. "I need time to find somewhere to go," I said. "Surely you don't expect me to leave tonight." Ethan's gaze hardened. "It's mine. Dad made that perfectly clear." I clutched the back of a chair, grounding myself as the reality sank in. Hours later, I found myself driving aimlessly through Chicago's industrial district, the city lights fading behind me. I stopped in front of a dilapidated garage, key trembling in my hand. Ethan's words echoed again. "You're just a useless old woman, Mom. What would you even do with a real inheritance?" I stepped inside, flashlight in hand, expecting decades of dust, rust, and broken tools. Instead, the beam revealed 3 vehicles, each carefully covered with fitted cloths, lined up like treasures in a museum. And then I saw it. My breath caught. The silver grille gleamed in the flashlight's beam, a vintage Aston Martin. My fingers shook as I pulled back the cover. A 1964 DB5 in pristine silver birch, gleaming as though it had just rolled off the factory floor. David had never mentioned this obsession, this secret passion. The next vehicle was a 1956 Mercedes-Benz 300 SL Gullwing, its deep blue paint reflecting the light, chrome accents sparkling like stars. The third, a 1967 Ferrari 275 GTB4, rich red reminiscent of the wine David used to order on our anniversaries. Beside each car lay leather portfolios with purchase agreements, provenance documents, and maintenance records. Even to my untrained eye, these were museum-quality vehicles, worth a fortune. An envelope on the wall bore David's unmistakable handwriting, "Margaret." With trembling hands, I opened it. The lights of the garage, modern, recessed LEDs, flooded the room, revealing climate-controlled floors, secure storage along the walls, and custom lighting designed to showcase the cars. This was no ordinary garage. This was a sanctuary, carefully curated for me. The letter inside explained everything. 6 years earlier, David had been diagnosed with a terminal condition. He had known our time together was limited and had secretly built a legacy to protect me. Ethan had received the visible inheritance, the penthouse, the investment portfolio, but the true wealth, millions in cars, properties, and bank accounts, had been hidden from him, safeguarded for Margaret. Tears streamed down my face as I understood the depth of David's foresight. He had anticipated Ethan's greed, his cruelty, and he had protected me in silence, ensuring I would live independently and securely. That night, I sat on a leather bench in the garage office, surrounded by vehicles worth millions, and allowed myself to grieve, to marvel, and finally, to breathe. I was no longer powerless. The useless old woman Ethan had mocked was, in fact, wealthy, protected, and free to live life on her own terms. The next morning, I would return to the penthouse, gather my personal treasures, and begin a new chapter in Cape May, the home David had prepared for me. And Ethan, if he ever discovered the truth about the garage, would learn too late that he had underestimated his mother. For now, I had the advantage of surprise and the quiet satisfaction that came with knowing my future, meticulously planned by the man I had loved for 42 years, was secure. The morning after my birthday felt strangely surreal. I had slept in the garage office on a surprisingly comfortable leather sofa, the faint scent of polished leather and motor oil mingling in the air. Sunlight filtered through the small high windows, catching dust motes and glinting off the sleek curves of the 3 cars I still could hardly believe were mine. For a moment, I just sat there, clutching David's letter, letting the weight of reality sink in. This was no ordinary inheritance. This was a carefully curated masterpiece, a secret life my husband had hidden from me for decades. I rose and paced slowly, my eyes taking in every detail of the garage. The climate control kept the air crisp, the floors were spotless, and the walls were lined with cabinets and shelves, each containing tools, supplies, and neatly labeled storage boxes. The attention to detail was staggering. David had anticipated everything, even the smallest things: extra keys, fuses, cleaning cloths, oil cans, and spare parts, all organized as if he had known I would one day be standing here, trying to understand his lifelong secret. My curiosity led me to the Aston Martin first. Its polished surface reflected the early sunlight streaming through the windows, making it glow as though it were a jewel. I ran my fingers along the body, marveling at how perfectly preserved it was. The interior was immaculate, as though someone had just detailed it yesterday. I gingerly opened the driver's door, the leather smell hitting me with an almost intoxicating familiarity. The steering wheel, the dials, the chrome accents, everything was flawless. I could hardly imagine driving it, though I wondered, not without excitement, what it would feel like to sit behind the wheel. But for now, it was a treasure to be admired. Next, I approached the Mercedes-Benz 300 SL Gullwing. Even from a distance, its elegance was undeniable. The doors, lifted in their iconic gullwing shape, seemed almost alive. As I ran my hands along the deep blue paint, I realized David had been collecting these cars not just as investments, but as objects of beauty, symbols of a life lived with taste and precision. I imagined the effort it had taken him to track down, authenticate, and maintain each vehicle, keeping them hidden away from the world and from me until the time was right. Finally, my gaze fell on the Ferrari 275 GTB4. Its rich red color reminded me of anniversaries long past, of dinners in quiet candlelight and laughter over bottles of fine wine. I pulled back the cover carefully, as though unwrapping a present. The chrome accents gleamed, and the interior leather gleamed with the same meticulous care David had given it. A small plaque nearby identified it: 1967 Ferrari 275 GTB4, VIN 08837. The authenticity, the details, the story embedded in this machine, it was breathtaking. I realized then that David had not just built a collection, he had built a legacy. As I moved through the garage, my eyes fell on a small envelope taped to the wall beside a light switch. The handwriting was unmistakable: David. With trembling hands, I tore it open and pulled out several sheets of paper. Another letter, this one explaining more of his intentions. He had anticipated Ethan's reaction to the will. He explained, and he had taken painstaking measures to ensure I would remain safe and independent. The cars, the safe, the properties, everything had been planned, timed perfectly to keep me secure and Ethan at bay. I couldn't help but smile through tears as I read. David had known his time was limited. His illness had given him perspective and clarity that I could never have expected. He had quietly built a fortune in secret, carefully balancing risk and opportunity, all while pretending to the world, and to me, that he was just a normal man living a normal life. And now, standing in this garage, I felt the weight of his love more acutely than I ever had. Curiosity drew me to the safe behind a framed photograph of us in Venice. The combination, of course, was our anniversary. I turned the dials and heard the satisfying click of the lock opening. Inside lay thick folders, neatly organized, and several USB drives, labeled meticulously. The first folder contained a complete inventory of David's assets. Income-producing properties in Seattle, Chicago, and New York, a vineyard in Northern California, various stock and bond portfolios, and private equity holdings. I could hardly believe my eyes. David had planned for every contingency, every possible obstacle, including Ethan's potential greed. I sank onto the leather bench, overwhelmed by the scope of it all. A life built in secret, a fortune hidden in plain sight, and a garage that looked like nothing more than an ordinary industrial building to the untrained eye. David's foresight was staggering. Every investment, every property, every car had been chosen not just for value, but for their ability to provide me with comfort, security, and independence. I spent hours that morning cataloging what I could see, taking notes, trying to comprehend the full extent of David's planning. There was a sense of calm in the meticulous order of the garage, a quiet assurance that even though Ethan had thrown me out of the penthouse, I was in no way powerless. In fact, I now held all the cards. David had given me more than wealth. He had given me control. By mid-afternoon, I called Marcus Weatherb, the trusted collector and advisor mentioned in David's letters. Despite the early hour, he answered promptly, his calm British accent reassuring. "Mrs. Reynolds," he said warmly, "I've been expecting your call." I explained what I had found, my voice still shaky with awe. Marcus promised to visit later that day, to help me understand the full scope of the collection and to advise me on how to handle the vehicles and other assets. Even as I hung up, I felt a surge of empowerment. For the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of purpose, of direction. I wandered back to the Ferrari, gently tracing the curves of the hood. It occurred to me that David had not just built a financial legacy. He had created a world that would allow me to thrive, even in his absence. And for the first time since Ethan's cruelty, I felt a spark of defiance. He might see me as useless, as weak. But in reality, I was anything but. Hours later, Marcus arrived, a distinguished man in his 60s, silver-haired, impeccably dressed in tweed with leather elbow patches. His calm presence immediately put me at ease. We walked through the garage together, cataloging each car, discussing provenance, maintenance, and investment potential. Every word reinforced what I had begun to realize. David's final gift was far more than a garage filled with cars. It was a carefully orchestrated plan to secure my independence, a protection against a son who had shown his true character all too clearly. By evening, I sat in the small garage office, the light from the LED fixtures soft and calming. The cars gleamed silently, like sentinels of David's love. For the first time, I allowed myself to imagine a future unbound by Ethan's cruelty, a future where I could live on my own terms, guided by David's wisdom and foresight. And as I finally settled into the leather sofa to sleep, I realized that this abandoned garage, mocked by Ethan and dismissed by the world, was in truth the most precious place I had ever known. It was my inheritance, my sanctuary, and the beginning of a new life. The next morning, I woke to the soft hum of the climate control system in the garage, the faint scent of leather and motor oil welcoming me like an old friend. Sunlight streamed through the high windows, casting long golden rays across the polished floors and the gleaming cars. The Aston Martin, the Mercedes, the Ferrari, all sat silently, almost expectantly, as if urging me to take my first steps into this new life. After a simple breakfast of granola bars and bottled water, I turned my attention to the folders and USB drives in David's safe. Carefully, I organized them on the leather desk in the office, my hands trembling slightly with anticipation. Each folder contained meticulously detailed records: property deeds, stock portfolios, private equity investments, insurance policies, and even letters from trusted advisors. I realized that David had thought of everything. He hadn't merely provided me with luxury cars. He had built a fortress of security, one that could never be breached by Ethan or anyone else who might underestimate me. I inserted the first USB drive into my laptop and waited for the files to load. A neatly organized spreadsheet appeared, showing the full extent of David's holdings: apartments in Seattle, commercial buildings in Chicago, a vineyard in Northern California, and multiple offshore accounts. I scrolled through the numbers, trying to comprehend the magnitude of his foresight. Each asset was carefully diversified, ensuring that my financial security was not just substantial but resilient. Even in the worst-case scenario, I would be protected. It was then that I noticed a handwritten note at the end of one file. For Susan, use wisely and live freely. Love, David. I felt a lump form in my throat. Even in death, he had thought of me, carefully orchestrating every detail to ensure that I would not just survive but thrive. By late morning, Marcus Weatherb arrived, punctual as always. He was exactly as I had imagined: silver-haired, impeccably dressed, with a calm, assured demeanor that immediately put me at ease. "Mrs. Reynolds," he said, shaking my hand firmly, "I trust you've had a chance to explore the garage?" I nodded, feeling a mix of awe and disbelief. "Yes, Marcus. I can hardly believe all of this exists." David never mentioned a single detail about it. Marcus smiled gently. Mr. Reynolds was a meticulous man. He planned every acquisition, every investment, for decades. What you see here is the culmination of a carefully crafted strategy. These cars are just the beginning. The folders, the properties, the accounts, everything has been structured to ensure your independence and security. He anticipated your son's reaction, and he wanted to protect you. We began to work methodically through the records, Marcus explaining the provenance of each vehicle, the appreciation potential, and the maintenance requirements. The Aston Martin alone was valued at over $4 million, while the Mercedes and Ferrari added another $8 million combined. Beyond the vehicles, the properties and investments were carefully diversified, totaling a portfolio exceeding $25 million. I couldn't stop myself from marveling at David's ingenuity. As we moved through the documents, I noticed a small envelope labeled "Optional" for Susan's discretion. With a sense of cautious curiosity, I opened it. Inside were letters and contracts relating to a private art collection David had been quietly amassing over the years. Paintings, sculptures, rare prints, each carefully chosen for both aesthetic and investment value. His attention to detail was astonishing. Even the art was insured, cataloged, and stored in climate-controlled facilities. David really thought of everything. I murmured, my voice tinged with awe and grief. Marcus nodded. Indeed, he wanted to ensure that no one, not even Ethan, could interfere with your inheritance. Every asset has been secured in your name, with contingencies to prevent unauthorized access. I realized then that my initial despair and fear of homelessness had been premature. David's foresight had created not just financial security, but true freedom. I could live anywhere, do anything, and make choices without constraint. The garage, once a symbol of my supposed disinheritance, had become a sanctuary of empowerment. By afternoon, I was able to breathe more deeply. For the first time since David's passing, I felt a sense of control, a sense of agency that had eluded me in the weeks of grief and shock. Marcus had been invaluable, explaining not only the financial aspects, but also the practical steps for managing the vehicles and properties. I realized that while David had provided the means, it was up to me to decide how to use them. Later, I wandered back to the Ferrari, running my fingers along the hood and imagining what it would feel like to drive it along the coastal roads. The thought was exhilarating. These cars were not merely investments. They were invitations to experience joy, to engage with the world in ways I had long forgotten. I took a break and sat in the small office, gazing at the sunlight filtering through the windows. My thoughts drifted to Ethan, my son, and the cruelty he had shown. He had believed the garage worthless, had thrown me out, and had dismissed my life and needs. I felt a surge of determination. He had underestimated me, as David had anticipated. I now held all the cards, and I would play them wisely. That evening, as the sky turned a deep amber and the sun dipped below the horizon, I took a quiet moment to reflect. David's plan was more than financial. It was a testament to his understanding, his love, and his wisdom. He had foreseen the worst, had anticipated the worst, and had left me in a position to rise above it. The garage, once a symbol of loss and humiliation, had transformed into a realm of opportunity and empowerment. I knew that the coming days would involve practical matters, contacting attorneys, financial advisors, and perhaps confronting Ethan once more. But for now, I allowed myself a rare moment of peace. I sat back in the leather chair, the scent of polished leather and engine oil surrounding me, and felt the weight of fear and grief begin to lift. The legacy David had left was more than wealth. It was independence, freedom, and a profound reminder that I was never, truly, powerless. And in that quiet moment, surrounded by the gleaming machines and meticulous organization, I realized that my life was no longer defined by loss. It was defined by potential, by the choices I would make, by the future David had worked so hard to create. For the first time since the will reading, I allowed myself to smile. This was just the beginning. The morning light filtered through the tall windows of the garage office, illuminating the polished floors and casting reflections across the cars. Susan sat at the desk, a notebook open before her, and Marcus weathered reviewing spreadsheets and investment summaries. The reality of what David had left her was beginning to sink in fully. She wasn't just wealthy. She was independent, empowered, and free to make decisions that no one, not even her son Ethan, could dictate. Marcus leaned over the desk, pointing at a column in one of the spreadsheets. These properties are income-producing, he explained. Seattle apartments, Chicago commercial buildings, and even the vineyard in Northern California. They're all under a trust that transfers directly to you. You won't need to worry about any legal complications for the next several years. Susan nodded slowly, still trying to process the numbers. She had spent the past few hours organizing the folders, separating documents for the cars, the properties, and David's investments. Each file she opened revealed yet another layer of meticulous planning, evidence of a man who had anticipated every eventuality. "Marcus," she said, looking up, "how do I even begin to manage all of this? It's overwhelming." He smiled kindly. "Mrs. Reynolds, you don't need to do everything at once. The first step is simply understanding the scope. Then you can decide what to keep, what to invest, and what to liquidate if you wish." David made sure you have advisors and resources to help. You're not alone in this. For the first time in weeks, Susan felt a flicker of hope. She realized that while Ethan had tried to dismiss her and assert control over the penthouse, the real inheritance, the cars, the properties, the investments, was hers entirely. David had left her not just wealth, but a safeguard against anyone who might have sought to undermine her. The phone rang, and Susan recognized Ethan's number immediately. She hesitated for a moment before answering, her voice measured. "Hello, Ethan." "Mom," he said, sounding slightly impatient. "Where are you? Aunt Helen said you didn't contact her." "I'm fine," Susan replied calmly. "I found somewhere to stay." There was a brief pause. Then Ethan said, "I need you to come pick up the rest of your things from the penthouse. The designers are starting tomorrow, and they need everything cleared out." Susan's heart hardened slightly. His tone carried no apology, no concern, only expectation. "I'll be there," she said quietly. After hanging up, she turned to Marcus. "He doesn't even know what's waiting for him," she murmured. A small, almost mischievous smile tugged at her lips. Marcus nodded knowingly. "He's underestimated you. That's the advantage David intended. You have time to plan, to decide how to handle him, and when." Susan spent the rest of the morning making calls, a lawyer specializing in estate matters, a financial advisor, and a property manager for the Carmel cottage. By late afternoon, she had a clear plan. She would first secure her new home, review the investments thoroughly, and only then decide how, or if, to confront Ethan about his behavior. Driving through the city toward the penthouse, Susan felt a strange combination of apprehension and determination. She had once felt powerless in Ethan's shadow, but now, Armed with the knowledge of her true inheritance, she felt a quiet confidence. Arriving at the penthouse, she noticed immediately how different it felt. Several decorative pieces were gone, family photos removed, leaving pale outlines on the walls. Ethan met her in the entryway, his phone in hand, barely acknowledging her presence. "I've boxed up most of your personal stuff," he said, gesturing to stacks of cardboard boxes. "The designers need everything cleared." Susan nodded calmly. "Thank you for taking care of that. I'd like to take my time with the items that matter most to me." Ethan's face hardened. "Can you hurry? I have meetings all day." Susan simply smiled, serene and composed. "Of course. I'll be efficient." She moved through the boxes with care, selecting her husband's books, his collection of fountain pens, and small personal mementos, items that held emotional value rather than monetary. Each object she set aside reminded her of David's love and foresight, a steady counterpoint to Ethan's impatience. When she reached the back of the closet, she found David's old leather messenger bag, hidden behind a row of coats. Inside was a sealed envelope labeled with her name. Another backup, she thought with a small laugh, David's meticulous nature evident even here. She tucked the envelope securely into her purse. By the time she had gathered everything, Ethan was growing restless, pacing the emptied penthouse. Susan, however, remained composed, her thoughts on the garage, the cars, and the wealth David had prepared for her. She realized she was no longer reacting. She was planning, considering her next steps with precision and clarity. Loading the last of her belongings into the car, Susan felt a mix of nostalgia and liberation. The penthouse had been a home filled with memories, both joyful and painful, but it was not the life David had intended for her. That life, carefully crafted and hidden, awaited in the garage and in the investments he had secured. Driving away from the city, Susan felt the weight of uncertainty lift. She no longer needed Ethan's approval, no longer needed to justify her existence. She was a woman with power, resources, and freedom, just as David had intended. Arriving at the garage, she was greeted by Marcus, who had come to help her transition her remaining possessions and review the next steps. "Mrs. Reynolds," he said, smiling warmly, "you have an incredible opportunity ahead of you. Let's make sure everything is in order before you make any major decisions." Susan nodded, her gaze lingering on the gleaming cars. For the first time, she truly understood David's vision. He had protected her from disappointment, from greed, and from a world that might not have recognized her worth. That evening, sitting in the garage office, Susan allowed herself to imagine the life ahead, the properties, the investments, and even the joy of driving one of the classic cars along open roads. She knew that the next steps would involve challenges, legal procedures, financial decisions, and perhaps even a confrontation with Ethan. But for the first time, she felt ready. David's plan had not just given her wealth. It had given her autonomy, control, and a chance to shape her future on her own terms. The useless old woman Ethan had mocked was gone, replaced by a confident, deliberate, and empowered Susan Reynolds. And as she looked around the garage, at the cars, the folders, and the meticulous organization, she whispered softly to David's memory, "Thank you. I'll honor your gift." The sun set outside, casting a warm glow over the polished floors. The garage, once a symbol of rejection, had become a sanctuary, a place where Susan could start again, where her life could unfold as David had envisioned. And for the first time in weeks, she felt truly at peace. The morning air was crisp as Susan Reynolds drove along the coastal highway toward Carmel, the Pacific shimmering beside her. The sunlight danced across the water, and for the first time since David's passing, she felt a sense of purpose beyond grief. This trip was not just about seeing the cottage he had prepared. It was about claiming the life he had meticulously built for her, a life independent of Ethan's control. The cottage appeared almost magically as she turned down the tree-lined lane, partially hidden behind mature cypress trees. The stone exterior and simple wooden gate exuded charm and privacy, a stark contrast to the penthouse's urban intensity. Susan parked in the driveway and stepped out, taking a deep breath. This was hers, truly hers, and she intended to make the most of it. Inside, the cottage was exactly as the documents had promised, cozy, inviting, and meticulously arranged. Each detail seemed to reflect David's understanding of her tastes, from the colors of the furnishings to the placement of artwork. She wandered through the rooms slowly, savoring the freedom to explore without intrusion. In the living room, she discovered built-in bookshelves lined with volumes she had long admired but never owned. The stone fireplace gave the room warmth, both literal and emotional. In the kitchen, the breakfast nook overlooked a small garden that caught the morning sun, offering a serene view of the Pacific in the distance. It was peaceful, comforting, and wholly hers. After a light breakfast of granola bars and coffee she had brought from the garage office, Susan called Marcus Wetherill to begin discussing the logistics of her inheritance. "Mrs. Reynolds," he said, his British accent calm and steady. "I assume you've had a chance to review the portfolio and the properties?" "Yes," Susan replied. "But I feel like I'm only beginning to understand the scope. I need to prioritize the investments, the properties, and then the cars. I want to make sure I protect everything David left me." Marcus chuckled softly. "A wise approach. I suggest we start with the income-producing properties. Ensuring they are managed efficiently will give you stability and cash flow, allowing you to make long-term decisions for the other assets." Susan took detailed notes, her focus sharpening with each point Marcus made. The properties required management, tax considerations, and maintenance, but nothing was insurmountable. David had set everything up in trust, and with Marcus's guidance, she would be fully in control within weeks. After the call, Susan stepped outside to take in the ocean air. The scent of salt water and the cry of gulls reminded her of family vacations she had shared with David, long before Ethan had grown into a man she barely recognized. She allowed herself a quiet smile, acknowledging that this moment marked the beginning of her autonomy. Later that afternoon, Susan visited the garage once more to inspect the cars. Each vehicle gleamed under the LED lights, polished and pristine. The Aston Martin, the Mercedes-Benz Gullwing, and the Ferrari seemed almost alive, the reflections of her flashlight dancing across their curves. She ran her fingers along the smooth surfaces, feeling the weight of David's foresight. These weren't just cars. They were symbols of trust, love, and independence. Marcus arrived shortly after she returned. "Are you ready to discuss options for the collection?" he asked. "I think so," Susan said, gesturing toward the vehicles. "I don't want to rush anything, but I also want to understand the financial potential." "Understood," Marcus replied. "The value has been appreciating steadily. You could sell them individually, maintain them as investments, or even donate them to museums. Some collectors would pay a premium for all three as a set." Susan considered this, realizing that the cars represented more than money. They were David's passion, hidden all those years, and now hers to decide upon. She resolved to preserve them, at least for a while, as both investments and reminders of her late husband's thoughtful planning. The following days were a whirlwind of activity. Susan met with a financial advisor to review the details of her trusts and investments. She set up accounts to manage cash flow from rental properties and scheduled regular maintenance for the vehicles. Each task, while demanding, reinforced her confidence. David had prepared everything with such precision that she felt guided at every turn. Then came the matter of Ethan. Susan had yet to confront him about the garage, the cars, and the full extent of her inheritance. She knew it would be a delicate situation. He had dismissed her, attempted to control the penthouse, and revealed a side of ambition and ruthlessness she hadn't wanted to see. But she was no longer powerless. She had a strategy, patience, and the weight of truth on her side. When she finally called him, she did so calmly, measured, and with the knowledge that she held all the cards. "Ethan," she began, "we need to talk about the inheritance and your behavior. But it will be on my terms, not yours." There was a pause on the line, then a sigh, and he replied, "I understand, Mom." Susan smiled faintly. "Good. I'll be in Los Angeles next week. We'll have a conversation then." Hanging up, she felt a sense of satisfaction. For the first time in her life, she was setting boundaries, asserting her independence, and making decisions without fear. David had left her a gift far greater than wealth. He had left her freedom, dignity, and the power to shape her own future. That evening, as the sun set over Carmel, Susan walked along the cliffs near her new home. The ocean stretched endlessly before her, vast and filled with possibilities. She felt a deep gratitude for David, for the life he had built behind the scenes, and for the opportunity to step into it fully. In the days that followed, Susan began personalizing the Carmel cottage, arranging furniture, hanging artwork, and planting flowers in the garden. She reveled in small acts of independence, choosing paint colors, deciding on furniture placement, and savoring meals prepared in her own kitchen. Each step was a reclaiming of life, a declaration that she was no longer a passive observer in the world her son sought to dominate. Through it all, the garage and its contents remained her sanctuary, a reminder that David's love and foresight had provided her with both tangible assets and the confidence to take control. And as she settled into her new routine, she realized that this was not merely survival. It was a beginning, a chance to live fully, deliberately, and freely. Susan Reynolds, once dismissed as a useless old woman by her own son, now stood poised to embrace a life she had never imagined, fortified by the love and meticulous planning of the man she had lost. The true inheritance had revealed itself, not just wealth, but autonomy, security, and the knowledge that she could chart her own path forward. And as she watched the last light fade from the Carmel sky, Susan felt a quiet determination settle over her. Whatever challenges lay ahead, with Ethan, the investments, or the choices yet to be made, she would face them on her own terms. She was no longer the woman the world had underestimated. She was Susan Reynolds, independent, empowered, and finally free. Susan Reynolds arrived in Los Angeles the following week, her mind calm and deliberate. The penthouse still felt like a space haunted by memories and betrayals, but she entered it with a new purpose. Dressed in a tailored navy suit from her Carmel wardrobe, her hair neatly styled, she exuded the quiet authority she had cultivated over the past weeks. Ethan opened the door, phone in hand as usual. "Mom," he said, surprise flashing across his face for just a moment before he masked it with impatience. "I didn't expect you today." "I'm here," Susan replied evenly. "To talk." He motioned her inside, closing the door behind her. The penthouse felt emptier than ever, stripped of the warmth and life that had once filled it. Susan noted the absence of family photos and personal touches she had left behind. "You've made quick work of clearing out," she observed. Ethan's eyes narrowed slightly. "It's efficient. That's all. We're optimizing the space." Susan ignored the jab and moved toward the living room. "Ethan, it's time we discuss your behavior regarding the inheritance, and your assumptions about my abilities and the value of what David left me." He shifted uneasily. "Mom, I think there's a misunderstanding. You have the garage and whatever's in it. That's more than enough. I handled the penthouse and investments because, well, it made sense." "Enough," Susan echoed, letting the word hang. "Do you even understand what's in that garage? The cars, the investments, the properties? David left me a fortune worth millions, millions, Ethan, and you dismissed it as worthless because you assumed I couldn't manage it." Ethan blinked, his confidence faltering. I didn't think it mattered. I thought that I was just a useless old woman." Susan's voice remained calm, but edged with steel. "Yes, you thought that. And that's precisely why David set it up this way. To test your character and to protect me from someone who would underestimate me." Ethan's face reddened. "Mom, that's—" "Silence," Susan interrupted. "I want you to listen." She took a deep breath, laying out the details of the garage, the cars, the income-producing properties, and the trust structures. As she spoke, Ethan's expression shifted from disbelief to shock, and finally to fear. He had always seen the inheritance as his reward, but now the power dynamic had flipped. The woman he thought incapable was not only capable, she was empowered beyond his imagination. I had no idea," Ethan whispered, his voice tight. Susan continued, her tone steady. "You assumed David's choices were mistakes. You assumed I couldn't handle responsibility. And you acted accordingly. You threw me out of the penthouse, disregarded my needs, and treated me as less than human. That was your first error." Ethan opened his mouth, but Susan raised a hand. "There will be no excuses. You will hear me, and then you will act. You will respect boundaries and recognize that your assumptions about others, especially me, have consequences." The silence stretched, heavy and uncomfortable. Finally, Ethan said, "Mom, I don't know what to say. I was wrong." "Being wrong is not enough," Susan replied. "Actions matter. And you must understand that your attitude toward me in the past weeks has consequences. David trusted you. Yes, but he also tested you. Your reaction to the penthouse and your dismissal of my inheritance revealed your true character." Ethan swallowed, shame and fear mingling in his expression. "What do you want from me?" Susan considered. Her mind raced through the weeks of planning, of carefully weighing every decision David had made to protect her. "I want respect. I want honesty. And I want a clear understanding that I am in control of my life and my inheritance. You will not interfere. You will not dismiss me again. If you wish to have a relationship with me, it must be on these terms." Ethan nodded, the first sign of genuine humility she had seen in years. "I understand, Mom. I'll try to do better. I want to make this right." Susan's expression softened slightly. "Trying is a start, but you will need to demonstrate that through actions, not words. Your father planned this for a reason. You had the chance to show character. Now, it is your choice how you proceed." For the first time in years, Ethan saw the depth of his mother's strength. The woman he had underestimated, dismissed, and even mocked was no longer the fragile figure he thought he knew. She was formidable, decisive, and in control of the very legacy he had coveted. Susan gathered the documents she had brought from Carmel, showing Ethan the trust arrangements, the portfolio, and the detailed plans David had left for her. "Everything here is legally binding. You have no claim to override it. But you do have a choice. Either accept this truth and work toward a respectful relationship, or continue down the path of arrogance and entitlement, and find yourself shut out completely." Ethan swallowed hard, nodding repeatedly. I understand, Mom. I'll respect your decisions. I promise." Susan placed the documents back in her bag. "Good. This is your chance. Don't squander it." She left the penthouse shortly after, feeling a mixture of relief and quiet triumph. Ethan would have to reconsider every assumption he had ever made about her. She was no longer a passive participant in his life. She was an active force, wielding both authority and independence. As she drove back toward Carmel, the sun dipping low on the horizon, Susan felt a profound sense of liberation. The confrontation had not been easy, but it had been necessary. She had faced her son, clarified the boundaries, and asserted control over the life David had so carefully designed for her. By the time she reached the cottage, the evening sky painted with shades of pink and gold, Susan felt the weight of the past weeks lifting. She stepped onto the flagstone patio, gazing at the ocean beyond, and realized that this confrontation, though challenging, was a turning point. She had claimed her inheritance, her autonomy, and her dignity. And now, nothing could take that from her. In the quiet of the Carmel evening, Susan Reynolds allowed herself a rare smile. She was not just surviving anymore. She was thriving, guided by the love and foresight of the man who had devoted his final years to protecting her. Ethan's reactions, while important, no longer dictated her sense of self. She had the power, the knowledge, and the freedom to shape her own destiny. And as the stars began to emerge over the Pacific, Susan knew that this confrontation was only the beginning. There would be decisions to make, investments to manage, and perhaps reconciliation to consider. But she was ready. She was prepared. She was finally free. The morning air in Carmel was crisp, carrying the faint scent of salt from the nearby Pacific. Susan Reynolds woke in her cozy bedroom, sunlight spilling across the hand-woven rugs that David had thoughtfully chosen for her. She stretched, feeling the tension of recent weeks begin to ease. Today marked the start of a new chapter, a life built not on dependence, but on autonomy, foresight, and the legacy carefully crafted by her late husband. After a simple breakfast of fresh fruit and coffee, Susan reviewed the documents she had brought from Los Angeles. The portfolios, trust agreements, and investment records demanded attention. David's meticulous planning was astounding. Every detail had been anticipated, every potential obstacle considered. It was clear that he had built not only financial security, but a roadmap for her independence, a framework for a life where she could thrive without interference. She picked up her phone and dialed Marcus Weatherb, David's trusted advisor in Los Angeles. "Mrs. Reynolds." Marcus answered warmly, his British accent immediately recognizable. "I've been expecting your call. I'd like to begin with the collection of vehicles, Marcus," Susan said. "I need to understand maintenance, insurance, and the best approach for managing them as investments. I also want to explore the possibility of showcasing them or selling them in part, if that makes sense financially." Marcus chuckled lightly. David was very thorough in his selection, and he ensured that the cars were stored in perfect condition. I can assist with all of that. Some collectors maintain vehicles as part of a long-term investment portfolio. Others find enjoyment in driving them occasionally. The choice is entirely yours. Susan smiled faintly. I intend to enjoy them responsibly, but first, I need to secure their ongoing preservation. I want to honor David's vision. Excellent, Marcus replied. I'll prepare a comprehensive management plan and a schedule for regular maintenance. I'll also provide you with contacts for trusted brokers and auction houses, should you choose to sell or display any of the vehicles. The call concluded with a sense of purpose that Susan hadn't felt in years. She placed the phone down and looked out the window at the waves breaking against the rocky coastline. The possibilities were exhilarating, and the sense of control over her future was empowering. By mid-morning, Susan had scheduled a virtual meeting with her financial team to review the broader estate portfolio. Stocks, bonds, real estate holdings, and the intricate trust arrangements. All of it formed a network designed to secure her comfort and independence for decades. As the video conference began, Susan felt a mix of focus and excitement. The advisors, professional and efficient, greeted her warmly. Mrs. Reynolds, it's an honor to finally meet you, one said. David spoke highly of your insight and discretion. We're here to assist in managing your estate according to his vision and your personal goals. Susan took a deep breath. Thank you. I want to fully understand the portfolio, the properties, and the trusts. I also want to ensure everything continues to align with David's intent, protecting my independence and financial security. The advisors nodded. They guided her through each asset, explaining valuation trends, projected income, and long-term strategies. By the time the meeting concluded, Susan had a solid grasp of her position and a plan of action. She was ready to move forward with confidence. Later that afternoon, she drove to the garage in Los Angeles, the site of David's most extraordinary secret. The sun glinted off the Pacific as she navigated Highway 1 and then the city streets. Her thoughts focused on the vintage cars and the opportunities they represented. When she arrived, she was greeted by the familiar sight of the three gleaming vehicles, each one a symbol of David's care and foresight. Susan ran her fingers along the polished surfaces, feeling a connection to the man who had spent years planning this legacy. The Aston Martin, the Mercedes-Benz 300 SL, and the Ferrari 275 GTB seemed almost alive under the sunlight streaming through the garage windows. Marcus arrived shortly after, bringing detailed maintenance logs and an overview of insurance policies. Mrs. Reynolds, he said, these cars are more than valuable. They are cultural artifacts. Their condition is exemplary, and we've established a long-term plan to preserve their value. I want to ensure that nothing is neglected, Susan replied. David trusted you implicitly, and I intend to honor that trust. Over the next several hours, Marcus walked her through procedures for inspections, storage conditions, and preventative maintenance. They discussed options for displaying the cars in museums, rotating them for exhibitions, or carefully selling one or two for strategic financial growth. Susan listened attentively, realizing that each decision would shape her future not just financially, but in terms of her independence and influence. Returning to Carmel that evening, Susan felt a profound sense of clarity. Her life was no longer defined by her son's assumptions or by the cruel dismissal she had endured in Los Angeles. She had the tools, the knowledge, and the support network to manage the estate, enjoy the fruits of David's labor, and step fully into the autonomy he had intended for her. As she sipped her tea on the patio, watching the sun sink into the Pacific horizon, Susan allowed herself a moment of reflection. David's plan had been both intricate and deeply personal. Every detail had been designed to protect her from harm, to ensure she would thrive, and to shield her from those who might underestimate her. His foresight, his love, and his strategic thinking had given her not only security, but empowerment. Susan knew there would be challenges ahead. Ethan would remain a presence, and navigating the relationship with her son would require careful consideration. But she also understood that she had agency now, a power she had never fully exercised before. Every decision, every step forward, would be hers to make. The night air cooled, and Susan gazed at the stars above Carmel. For the first time in months, the sense of fear, betrayal, and uncertainty that had haunted her was replaced by confidence, hope, and purpose. She had inherited more than wealth. She had inherited freedom, autonomy, and the opportunity to live life on her terms. Tomorrow, she would begin exploring her properties, meeting with financial advisors in person, and carefully considering the next steps for the automotive collection. But tonight, she allowed herself the rare luxury of contentment. The legacy David had left her was not just a fortune. It was a life meticulously designed for her to flourish, a gift born of love, strategy, and unwavering care. And as she finally retired to bed, Susan Reynolds felt a profound sense of triumph. She had emerged from loss and betrayal stronger than ever. Her future was hers, and she would embrace it fully, guided by the vision and love of the man who had always seen her potential, even when the world had not. The morning sunlight streamed through the windows of Susan Reynolds' modest Carmel cottage, illuminating the hardwood floors and the carefully chosen furnishings that reflected both comfort and understated elegance. Today, she had a schedule packed with meetings, site visits, and decisions, each one a step toward fully taking control of the life David had designed for her. Her first call was to Patricia Winters, the estate attorney Marcus had recommended. Susan had spent the previous days reviewing documents, but she knew that legal counsel would be crucial in navigating the complexities of trusts, property ownership, and financial management. "Good morning, Mrs. Reynolds," Patricia greeted warmly. "I trust you're settling in comfortably." "I am, thank you. This place feels peaceful, but I need guidance. I want to ensure I handle everything correctly: properties, investments, and the car collection. David's plans are comprehensive, but I want to be certain nothing is overlooked." Patricia nodded. "We'll start by reviewing each trust and asset. I'll make sure everything is aligned with David's intentions and U.S. law. We'll also discuss any tax implications, potential estate planning adjustments, and strategies for managing relationships with family members, particularly your son." Susan felt a tight knot form in her stomach at the mention of Ethan. The confrontation in Los Angeles still lingered in her mind. His dismissal, his lack of empathy, and the way he had attempted to control her after David's death had been painful. But she reminded herself, this wasn't about revenge, it was about independence. "I'm ready," she said firmly. After a thorough morning session, Patricia outlined actionable steps: maintain current asset management, begin gradual property assessment visits, and prepare for potential negotiations with Ethan regarding items he might contest. Each step was carefully designed to protect Susan's autonomy and ensure she had full authority over her inheritance. By late morning, Susan was driving along the scenic coastline toward one of the properties David had secured years earlier, a charming apartment complex in Santa Barbara. Marcus had arranged a meeting with the property manager to review occupancy, maintenance schedules, and financial performance. As Susan approached the complex, she felt a wave of responsibility. These weren't just numbers on paper. They were real assets generating income that would secure her future. Walking through the units, meeting tenants, and reviewing records gave her a tangible sense of control. Each interaction reminded her that she was more capable than she had ever allowed herself to believe. Returning to Carmel, Susan took a moment to sit in the small study overlooking her garden. She sipped tea, reflecting on the morning's activities. The estate, the properties, the car collection, it was all within her grasp. She had the knowledge, the tools, and the support network to manage it effectively. The afternoon was devoted to the cars. She drove back to Los Angeles, excitement and anticipation building with each mile. The three gleaming vehicles, Aston Martin, Mercedes-Benz 300 SL, and Ferrari 275 GTB4, stood in the climate-controlled garage, each one a testament to David's foresight and passion. Marcus was there, prepared with detailed maintenance logs, insurance documents, and suggested strategies for leveraging the cars as investments or personal enjoyment. "Mrs. Reynolds," Marcus began, "the first priority is preservation. These vehicles are rare and increasing in value steadily. We've arranged for expert maintenance and regular inspections, which I recommend continuing without interruption." Susan nodded. "I want to honor David's intentions, but I also want to understand my options for the future, whether that means selling, displaying, or even occasionally driving them." Marcus smiled. "All are viable. The key is thoughtful management and patience. These cars will retain, and likely increase, their value if handled carefully. Together, they walked through the garage, examining each vehicle. Susan felt a deep connection to David in that space. The precision, the care, the hidden love he had invested in this collection. It wasn't merely wealth. It was his expression of devotion, a tangible legacy of their shared life and his foresight. Driving back to Carmel in the evening, Susan reflected on the day. She realized that control wasn't just about money. It was about freedom, dignity, and the ability to shape her own life. David had anticipated potential challenges, and through his meticulous planning, he had given her the power to navigate them with confidence. That night, she began drafting a personal plan. Each property, investment, and vehicle would be accounted for, decisions carefully considered, and her future mapped out. She felt a renewed sense of purpose. No longer the useless old woman her son had labeled her, Susan Reynolds was a capable, independent woman, empowered by the love and foresight of the man she had shared her life with for decades. Before bed, she opened the envelope David had hidden in the back of her closet, the backup to the safe in Los Angeles. She reviewed the documents again, confirming every detail and making notes for her next steps. Every page reinforced a single truth. She was no longer at the mercy of anyone else's assumptions. For the first time since David's death, Susan felt the exhilarating freedom of choice. The penthouse, once a symbol of loss and displacement, no longer mattered. The garage, the properties, and the investments, all of it belonged to her. She had the means to build a life defined by her own values and desires. As she drifted off to sleep, Susan Reynolds envisioned a future filled with possibility. Exploring her properties, managing her investments, perhaps even traveling again in the spirit of David's thoughtful adventures. The road ahead was hers to define, guided by his wisdom, her strength, and the clear understanding that she was capable of more than anyone, including herself, had previously imagined. And somewhere in the quiet night, she whispered a soft thank you to David, her husband, her partner, and her unwavering protector, for the legacy, the love, and the freedom he had entrusted to her, and for the courage to finally claim it. The morning fog hung low over Carmel as Susan Reynolds sipped her coffee on the patio, the scent of salt and cypress mingling with the warmth of the sun beginning to rise. Today, she knew, would be a turning point, not just in managing David's inheritance, but in addressing the difficult relationship with her son, Ethan. Her phone buzzed. It was a message from Patricia Winters, the attorney. "I've reviewed the proposed communications with Ethan. Are you ready to speak with him?" Susan hesitated for a moment. She had spent days preparing herself mentally, emotionally, and financially. She had grown stronger, more resolute, and for the first time, she felt the authority to define the terms of the conversation. "Yes," she texted back. "I am ready." By late morning, she was back in Los Angeles, navigating the streets she had once called home. The city felt colder, more distant, as if it too had recognized her transformation. She parked near the penthouse and took a deep breath before stepping inside, her presence deliberate and confident. Ethan met her at the door, his expression a mixture of surprise and mild annoyance. "Mom, you're here," he said, barely masking impatience. "Yes, Ethan," Susan replied calmly. "I came to retrieve the remaining personal items and to discuss the situation regarding the inheritance." His lips pressed into a thin line. "Right. Well, everything valuable is already with me. Most of your things are packed in boxes upstairs. I just need a few hours to finalize things." Susan's gaze hardened, not with anger, but with clarity. "Ethan, I want to be very clear. I am no longer dependent on your judgment or goodwill. What David left me, what he carefully planned, is mine. I intend to manage it responsibly, and I will do so without interference." He blinked, a flicker of surprise crossing his features. "Mom, I didn't. You underestimated me." "Ethan," she interrupted, her voice firm yet controlled. "You assumed the garage was worthless. You assumed I was powerless. You assumed wrong." He shifted uncomfortably, glancing at the boxes filled with clothing, books, and personal mementos. "Mom, I was just trying to." "Trying to what?" Susan asked softly, letting the weight of the question linger. "Protect me? Control me? Decide what I could or could not have. David anticipated your intentions. He planned for them. I now have the means to live independently, and I will exercise that right fully. Ethan swallowed hard. I, I didn't realize. You didn't realize because you never stopped to truly see me, Ethan, Susan said. For years, I allowed you to define your own rules for our relationship. David saw things more clearly, and he ensured I would have the freedom and security to make my own choices, free from manipulation or dismissal. The silence that followed was heavy. Ethan looked down at the floor, a shadow of guilt passing briefly across his face. Mom, I didn't mean. I know what you didn't mean, Susan replied. But intentions are not enough. Actions matter. You chose to throw me out of my home, to diminish my worth, and to believe you had a right to control what wasn't yours. Now, you will have to live with the consequences of those choices. Ethan's shoulders slumped. I see. I suppose I misjudged a lot of things. Susan softened slightly, though her resolve remained firm. Perhaps, but it is not my responsibility to repair your character. It is my responsibility to protect myself and manage my inheritance wisely. This includes maintaining control over the assets David left me, properties, investments, and the vehicles. She gestured toward the boxes. These items are personal. They are memories, not currency. I will be taking what is meaningful to me, and the rest will be donated. David would have wanted me to have that choice. Ethan nodded, subdued. All right, Mom. I understand. Susan allowed herself a small, private sigh of relief. This confrontation, though uncomfortable, was necessary. She had established boundaries, asserted her autonomy, and made it clear that her life and assets were under her control. After gathering the remaining personal items, Susan took a moment to glance around the now empty penthouse. The rooms were stripped of their familiar warmth, the photographs removed, and the furniture rearranged for the coming renovations. It was no longer her home, nor was it intended to be. Driving back to Carmel, she felt a renewed sense of liberation. She was not bound by the expectations, dismissals, or entitlement of her son. She was free to craft a life that reflected her values, her tastes, and her vision for the future. Over the following days, Susan focused on finalizing her estate management plans. She visited each of the properties David had acquired, met with managers, and began evaluating long-term strategies. Each interaction reinforced her confidence and highlighted her capabilities. She was no longer simply reacting to circumstances. She was shaping them. Marcus Weatherb continued to provide guidance on the car collection, advising her on insurance, storage, and potential sales. Susan found herself fascinated not only by the financial potential, but by the artistry and history of the vehicles. Each car became a symbol of David's foresight and the tangible expression of a life well lived. One evening, as the Pacific sun set over the Carmel coastline, Susan sat on her patio reflecting on the journey thus far. The path had been rocky, filled with grief, betrayal, and uncertainty. Yet she had emerged stronger, more resilient, and fully in command of her destiny. Her phone buzzed. A text from Patricia Winters. All documentation is in order. Your estate plan is secure. The transition to independence is complete. Congratulations. Susan smiled, a warmth spreading through her chest. She typed a quick reply. Thank you, Patricia, for your guidance and for helping me take control. Leaning back, she watched the waves crash gently against the shore, their rhythmic motion a reminder that life moved forward, regardless of past pain or uncertainty. She felt a deep sense of gratitude for David's careful planning, for the clarity she had gained, and for the knowledge that she was capable of managing both wealth and independence with wisdom and grace. For the first time in weeks, Susan Reynolds allowed herself to fully exhale. She was no longer merely surviving. She was living, on her own terms, guided by love, foresight, and the strength she had discovered within herself. And in that quiet, golden evening, she whispered a promise to herself. She would honor David's legacy not just with careful management of his assets, but by embracing the freedom, joy, and purpose he had secured for her. She would live fully, boldly, and independently, shaping the next chapter of her life exactly as she chose. The morning light in Carmel spilled through the windows of Susan Reynolds' new home, painting the hardwood floors in soft gold. She stood by the kitchen sink, a cup of tea warming her hands, and allowed herself a quiet smile. For the first time in months, she felt entirely at peace. The upheaval, the betrayal, the grief. It all seemed part of a distant storm she had survived, and now the calm was hers to enjoy. The cottage was everything David had promised it would be: cozy, private, and filled with subtle touches that reflected their shared memories. The garden outside her window was in bloom, with lavender and rosemary releasing their scents into the crisp morning air. Even the sound of the waves crashing on the nearby shore seemed to echo David's careful planning, a rhythm of reassurance and continuity. Susan's first day was dedicated to organizing her new life. She arranged furniture to her taste, unpacked the personal mementos that had survived Ethan's indifference, and settled her correspondence from the lawyers, financial advisors, and Marcus Wetherb. Each document was a testament to David's foresight and love, a bridge connecting her past with the independence she now claimed. By midday, Marcus arrived at the cottage, carrying his familiar leather portfolio. "Mrs. Reynolds," he said, greeting her with a warm, professional smile. "I've reviewed the car collection and the associated paperwork. Everything is in impeccable order, and you have full autonomy over the assets." Susan poured coffee for both of them. "Thank you, Marcus. I want to ensure I make decisions wisely, but also enjoy the fruits of David's planning." Marcus nodded. "Of course, you have multiple options. You can maintain the vehicles as investments, sell one or more individually, or even display them for charitable events. Their value is likely to increase, but there's also joy to be found in appreciating them, if you wish." She smiled. "David always wanted me to have both security and enjoyment. It feels strange, but wonderful, to be trusted with this." "Indeed," Marcus said. "And your other assets, properties, investments, and accounts, are all structured to provide you with independence and peace of mind." David was very thorough. Susan leaned back, letting the weight of her responsibilities and freedoms settle comfortably on her shoulders. She was no longer the woman dismissed by her son or underestimated by anyone. She was capable, prepared, and empowered. Her thoughts turned inevitably to Ethan. After days of contemplation and advice from Patricia Winters, she had decided on a measured approach. She would inform him of the value of her inheritance and the extent of David's planning, but only on her terms, and only when she felt he was ready to hear it with humility. Before making that call, she allowed herself to walk along the small stone path leading to the garden. The morning air was invigorating, carrying the salt of the Pacific and the subtle sweetness of blooming flowers. Each step felt symbolic, a movement toward a life defined not by the limitations imposed by others, but by her own choices. The phone buzzed. It was a message from Patricia. "Ethan is available to discuss the estate today. Are you ready?" Susan paused, considering. She had prepared her words carefully. She had rehearsed how to maintain composure, how to set boundaries, and how to assert her authority without unnecessary conflict. She texted back, "Yes, I'm ready." Minutes later, she found herself on a video call with Ethan. His face appeared on the screen, tension and apprehension mingling in his expression. "Mom," he began, voice tentative. I wanted to talk about the inheritance." Susan took a deep breath. "Ethan, I am glad you reached out. I want to be clear about a few things before we proceed. Everything David left me, properties, investments, and vehicles, are under my control. I am fully empowered to make decisions regarding them, and I will do so with care and thoughtfulness." Ethan nodded, swallowing hard. "I understand. I suppose I misjudged the situation before. I didn't realize the extent of what David had planned, or how capable you are." Susan allowed herself a small, private smile. "You underestimated me, Ethan. It's understandable, but that doesn't change the reality. This is my inheritance, and I intend to manage it responsibly, with or without your input. Any cooperation or communication from you must be respectful and considerate, not self-serving." He nodded, his pride visibly checked by the truth of her words. I will respect that. I see now what I failed to understand." "You have a choice, Ethan," Susan said. "You may learn from this and approach our relationship with humility and care, or you may continue down the path of entitlement and dismissal. The decision is yours, but know this: I am no longer dependent on your approval or support." The silence on the other end of the line was telling. Ethan seemed to absorb her words fully, and for the first time, Susan sensed the possibility of change, a recognition that the son she had raised needed to see her as the independent, strong woman she had always been. The call ended, and Susan felt a profound sense of closure. She had faced the most difficult relationship in her life and established her authority, grounded in the foresight and love of her late husband. Over the following weeks, Susan embraced her new life in Carmel. She explored the coastal town, visiting boutiques, cafes, and local art galleries, discovering joys she had long postponed. She arranged the car collection, meeting with collectors and enthusiasts who shared her appreciation for their historical and aesthetic value. Each interaction reinforced her confidence, reminding her that wealth was not just a tool for survival, but a gateway to freedom and fulfillment. Evenings were spent in quiet reflection, the ocean's rhythm providing a meditative backdrop. Susan began journaling, documenting her experiences, insights, and plans for the future. She felt the layers of grief, betrayal, and uncertainty peel away, replaced by purpose, clarity, and a renewed sense of self. One afternoon, a knock on the door revealed Margaret Winters, her kind neighbor, carrying a tray of homemade scones. "I thought you might like some company," Margaret said warmly. "David spoke highly of you, and I wanted to welcome you properly." Susan smiled, accepting the tray. "Thank you, Margaret. That's very thoughtful of you." They sat in the sunlit living room, talking about the town, the gardens, and life's unexpected turns. Susan realized that her new chapter was not only about wealth and independence, but also about connection, community, and joy, the elements that David had quietly ensured would remain accessible to her. As dusk fell over Carmel, Susan stood on the patio once more, gazing at the horizon where the sky met the ocean. The sun dipped slowly, painting the world in fiery orange and soft pink, and she felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. David had given her more than material wealth. He had given her freedom, agency, and the knowledge that she could navigate life's challenges with wisdom and strength. She whispered a quiet promise to herself: "This life is mine. I will honor David's legacy, not only with careful stewardship of the assets he entrusted to me, but by living fully, boldly, and with purpose." For the first time in decades, Susan Reynolds felt completely and unambiguously free. She had survived betrayal, grief, and loss, and had emerged not only unbroken, but empowered. The coastal winds carried a sense of possibility and hope, and she inhaled deeply, savoring the promise of each new day. Her life, meticulously planned by David from the shadows, was now fully hers to embrace. She smiled, feeling the weight of the past lift, replaced by the lightness of independence and the promise of endless horizons. And in that moment, Susan Reynolds knew with unwavering certainty: the useless old woman her son had dismissed was gone. In her place stood a woman of vision, strength, and freedom, ready to live the life she had always deserved.